Before getting into action with respect to CRUD operations, we need to prepare tables. Let's go ahead and create a table so that we can go through the CRUD operations against that table. We can either use pSQL or SQL Workbench to connect to the database and create table directly. pSQL is nothing but a Postgres CLI. Using command line interface, you can connect to the Postgres database and you can create tables, insert data into the tables, drop the tables, so on and so forth. Or we can also use SQL Workbench for the same. In this case, we'll be dropping and creating the table users if it already exists. I'm using Jupyter based environment for demo. Feel free to use whatever is relevant to your project or comfortable for you. If you are new to these terms such as pSQL, SQL Workbench, creating the tables, etc., you have to focus on your database and SQL skills. One need to have decent database and SQL skills to be comfortable with all types of application development. Feel free to master SQL using PostgreSQL as target database using the course or the playlist. You can actually click on these links and you should be able to go to the course or the playlist on our YouTube channel. So this is how you can access the material and improvise your database and SQL skills. That being said, as we are going to use Jupyter for the demo, I have to load something called as SQL Magic. Also, I need to create an environment variable called as database_URL to connect to SMS database using the SMS related credentials for my user. Let me create this environment variable. This is nothing but SQL Alchemy dialect with all the details such as user, password, host, port, as well as the database name. Whatever we have seen earlier, the same information we have to pass to build this environment variable called as database_URL. Whenever we run a query, Jupyter takes care of connecting to the database using this information with SQL Alchemy as the library, which is nothing but a Python based library, and it will actually return the results for us. We don't need to go through the programming language approach when we use Jupyter to explore the SQL queries. We can directly use this SQL Magic, create the environment variables, and write the queries directly without getting into the nuances with respect to the programming language. That being said, first I'm validating against the information schema tables. There are a bunch of tables already in this. You might not see all these tables in your database. In my database, there are a bunch of tables. In your case, you might see only the system tables. Now I'm dropping the table called as users with cascade. If the table exists, even if the table contains the relationships with other tables, all those will be dropped and the table will be dropped. You can actually validate by running this. Anyway, as part of the earlier output also, you do not see users. Even now, you will not be seeing users. What you can do is you can actually add additional condition by saying and table_name equal to users. You can run this. As the table is dropped, you will not be seeing the output here. If the table exists, you will see the output. Now let me create this table. The table name is nothing but users. And let me run this query with this additional condition, so that we see only details related to users table. So I'm adding this additional condition here. Now let me validate. You can see the users table here. You can also check the columns of the users table. As we have just created the table and as we haven't loaded any data into the table, it will be empty. You can see it is completely empty. If you review the schema of users, it have user ID of type serial with the primary key, which means it is populated using a sequence internally, and it will be primary key, which means the uniqueness and not null will be enforced on user ID. User first name, last name and email ID are of type varchar with different lengths. All of them are not nulls. User email validated is of type boolean, and by default it is not validated. That's why we are setting it as false. Password, there is no constraints on top of password. However, the length is varchar of 200. User role is not null. By default it will be U. We can also have A. U stands for user and A stands for admin. Is active is by default false, and it is of type boolean. It can have true or false, and by default it is false. Create_TS will be defaulted to current timestamp. Last updated TS also will be defaulted to current timestamp. So create_TS and last updated TS are nothing but audit columns. It is one of the best practices to create the tables with these audit columns. The difference is create_TS will be populated only on inserts with the default values. Last updated TS will be populated at the time of insert with the default value, as well as at the time of update by getting current timestamp during the update. So defaults will be set only as part of the inserts, not as part of the updates. We have to explicitly specify last updated TS in our update statements so that we track when the record is last updated. So it is one of the best practice to actually create these audit columns such as create_TS, last updated TS while dealing with databases for our applications. That being said, if you are not familiar with the nuances related to pSQL, SQL Workbench, create tables, so on and so forth, I would highly recommend you to take this course either by clicking on this link or this link. This is nothing but YouTube playlist playlist, and this is nothing but our portal where you should be able to learn Postgres. The interface might change a little bit at a later point in time, but more or less you will be seeing the same content. So don't worry too much about all these topics to begin with. These are not relevant for the database programming. The primary areas which you should focus are nothing but getting started, where you will understand how to connect to database, how to use pSQL, how to use SQL Workbench to connect to the database and perform some common tasks such as creating tables, and then directly jump on to creating tables and indexes and spend some time on first few topics. Make sure you are comfortable with the create table statement, create the table, and focus on your database programming by performing the CRUD operations. Once you are comfortable with CRUD operations using the programming language, you can come back and focus on enhancing your SQL skills by going through this complete course. You should be familiar with both programming using Python as well as SQL, so that you can actually build solid applications using Python as programming language with any database under the hood. So make sure you are comfortable with both programming as well as SQL. These are essentials for any development role, whether it is application development, data engineer, even in case of DevOps engineer also it is quite useful. So make sure you're comfortable with both programming language as well as the SQL. That being said, as we have successfully created the table using Jupyter in my case, let's get into the details about how to perform CRUD operations using Python as programming language.